Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Learning and Families Committee meeting, and welcome to those watching online as well. Wallace, if there are any apologies, please.
I've got two apologies, convener. I had apologies from Ian Massey, and Jack Welch is substituting today. I've got apologies from Councillor Noah Kigali as well, and Councillor Bob Brown is substituting for him today. I believe he's online.
Thank you, Wallace. I think we need to do a roll call of those online, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see Councillor Bob Brown. Just give me a shout if
yes,
you can
I'm
hear
present.
me.
Thank you. Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Brian Leishman.
Good afternoon, Wallace. I'm here.
Councillor Dave Cuthbert.
I'm here.
It's showing you as online here, sorry. Councillor Grant Stewart. All right, present here. Is the provost online? It was, yeah. I think that's it for now, convener.
Okay, thank you very much, Wallace. Thank you. Any declarations of interest from members? No. Okay, thank you. There's 3 sets of minutes I'm going to ask to be approved. Executive Subcommittee of Learning and Families of 28th August 2023. Any questions, comments, or can they be agreed? Thank you. Okay, thank you. There's the Learning and Families Committee of 11th of March. Can we agree the minutes of that as well? Thank you. Joint Negotiating Committee for Teaching Staff of 20th December 2023. Thank you. And Children, Young People and Families Partnership of 1st December 2023. You okay with that, Michelle? Thank you. I'll move on to item 4, outstanding business statement. Are there any questions on the outstanding business statement or indeed comments? Councillor Barrett.
Just to ask if we've made any progress on this, convener, please.
Yes, I think we have. I'll ask Scott for details though.
Thanks, convener. Yes, I was going to provide an update, as we mentioned in the outstanding business statement, just in terms of the non-voting members on the committee. In terms of the youth representatives, as members will be aware, the scheme of administration outlines that we have 2 representatives of children and young people from the Perth and Kinross Youth Forum. In terms of UNCRC obligations, there is statutory engagement that already happens in terms of between the council and young people. In terms of feedback and discussions with the young people, attending a committee meeting during the school hours hasn't proven to be the best form of engagement and participation that we think that we could have. And the Perth and Kinross Youth Forum are looking at the best ways and platforms for meaningful youth engagement. Following discussions with staff in both Children's Families and Justice and also Education and Learning, as well as with the convener and vice conveners, we're now proposing that there is an engagement plan worked up to allow regular meetings and opportunities for feedback between the representatives of the Youth Forum and the convener and vice conveners. This would be at a time and format that would best suit the young people and wouldn't just include the business and reports going to this committee, but would also be to discuss general topics of interest. The convener would then regularly report back to this committee with updates on the outcomes of these meetings. If this committee is in approval, then we would seek to amend the scheme of administration at the future council meeting. One other further update in terms of parent representatives, after the last meeting, we have written out again to all parent councils, and we've had some nominations that have come forward, and we would hope to be in a position to bring candidates for approval to the next meeting of this committee in August. Happy to take any other questions.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you for the update. Thank you. And I would support the proposal about the engagement of young people. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Barrett. I think it's important to add as well that having had discussions with Scott, I do think it's really important that we engage with young people clearly. I think we'd all accept that. But I also accept that this formal arrangement is probably not the best way to do that. So I think it's incumbent upon us as a committee and myself as convener that we engage with young people on their terms, as it were. So I'm entirely happy with that principle. How we do that, I think we're all open to although Scott has his plans, we're all open to suggestions about that. It shouldn't necessarily just be me, it should be us all. So, but if committees agreed on the principle of that, I think that is an important step forward. Councillor Shires.
I don't disagree with anything that you've said. I suppose the only issue is around, it's not just the young people's voice, it's the parents, it's the teacher reps. Adrian's very diligent at coming to the meetings, but we have struggled to get people to come along, and whether we looked at the timing of this committee, if we're serious about having external representation on it, maybe move it till later in the afternoon. That means people could come, after work or whatever, whether that's an opportunity to be considered.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point, Councillor Shires. I think we're happy, committee services are happy to look at any options that increases engagement. I think it is worth saying that the old cliche about leading a horse to water and you can't make it drink is also true to some degree, but that shouldn't stop us trying to engage as many stakeholders as possible, and we will continue to do that. Thanks, Scott. Councillor Provost McDade, do you have a comment, please?
Hi, thanks. Sorry, I've been having some challenges with Teams. I just want to sort of come in and echo what Councillor Shires was saying. I think it would be good to look at whether there are opportunities for us to change how we do business that opens up the opportunities for all of the different participants, and whether that is later times or indeed going out to base ourselves at the schools, perhaps occasionally where the young people are based, or I think there is a wider set of options. I think one of the things from my point of view that I'm concerned about would be to lose that direct interaction between the young people and members of the committee, and as Councillor Shires says, the wider sort of forum, hearing those voices, because actually it's not just about them feeding in, it's them being able to feel like they're actually part of the decision, and it's not just being a stakeholder, it is being around the table and having that. So I would be keen that we look at ways to facilitate those voices being around the table, even if it does require us to do a bit of moving of how we do business.
Thanks, Provost. I again largely agree with what you've said. I think a couple of points. I think most of us do engage with young people and parents and other stakeholders on a regular basis, indeed on a day-to-day basis. However, the formal engagement is still important, and I think we'd all be open to doing anything that we can to increase that engagement. I know in the last term we had Lennon Families meetings in the communities a couple of times. I think that was actually really good, and I think it's just been for practical reasons we've not done that since. But if that's something that we think would genuinely be beneficial, or indeed having meetings at a different time, I think if there's real evidence to suggest that would be helpful, then fine by me. So thanks everyone for engagement on that. Is there any more questions or comments on the OBS, or can we agree it or note it? Thank you. And we move on to the first substantial paper of the day, which is our accessibility strategy, and I'll ask Sheila Devlin to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Convener, and good afternoon, councillors. This report provides a summary of the progress that's been made to date in the delivery of the accessibility strategy and action plan for all schools and services involved in delivering education for pupils with disabilities or additional support needs within Perth and Kinross Council Education Service. Appendix 1 to the report lays out the activity completed to date under the 3 duties that require to be covered in the strategy, and it also outlines some of the key steps to be taken in the final year of this action plan. We have Fiona Mackay here, Service Manager for Inclusion, myself in the chamber, who are happy to take any questions, and online we also have Jill Dugan, Service Manager for Primary, who also will be able to assist with any questions committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Bailey Hearn, one question, please, I think, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, my first question is with regards to the duty 2 paragraph on page 33 and page 3 of the report. It's with regards to the audit of ISP learning environments has been completed, and I just wonder what the result was and how many of the schools that have been surveyed are not able to put a specialist in ISP provision. And so I suppose alongside that, we've seen a lot in there about the provision that's been put in Riverside Primary School, which is excellent, and I think is a fantastic provision for the children of that area. But we're building a new high school, and there's no such provision in that. So we're looking at changing the old estate, but when we're looking at building new schools, we're not actually looking in 50% of the schools we're building at the moment or have built in putting a provision in. And I don't know why it wasn't thought about in the high school.
I'll come to Fiona. Okay, certainly with regards to the high school, it was the last administration. It should be noted that we're responsible for the detail of that, but I'll ask Fiona for answers on the broader question.
Right, we're here now. In terms of the audit that was undertaken, that was of our existing ISPs, so it wasn't looking at the schools that don't have an ISP in them at this point in time. So it was looking at the environments, the sensory environments, the environments that impact on children with a visual impairment or a hearing impairment, and things like whether or not they all had equitable access to IT equipment. The report from that has come forward now, and it hasn't yet got to SMT, but that will be something that we will be looking at later this academic year to review what works we will look to support. A number of things have already taken place in terms of making particularly IT more accessible, and a number of all ISPs were supported with a provision of iPads over the last few months. And other requirements that will come from that may be supported by the budget motion funding around the quiet spaces, but also by provision of sensory equipment that we have already looked to have in place. So there will be an action plan that's developed from the audit that we will look to take forward. Some of those actions will be easier than others, but we will look to provide a response to the ISPs for the beginning of the next academic year. I haven't commented on other areas. Leave them.
If I could come in, Bailey Hearn, as Fiona said, the audit that is mentioned was of the existing provisions to look at the recency of the technology, the quality of the resources, the furniture, the layout, that kind of thing, to ensure some kind of consistency across the piece. And in terms of the work that's been done to date, what we're currently looking at is a matching of where we know the level of need as such, with where there's perhaps not that level of provision across different localities, and what that might look like. But of course, sitting behind that, there'll be some significant budget considerations that we would then need to consider about whether or not those could be met with an existing budget, or whether that would require some additional investment, and then obviously engage through due process in relation to that. You asked specifically about the provision in Riverside. There were, of course, provisions in Northmuirton Primary, and there was also some provision in Balhousie, and so what there has been is a continuation of that existing provision, but in the new building in Riverside Primary. And in terms of Perth High, I know this has been asked on a number of occasions why there wasn't consideration given to that. At the time of all of the plans being developed, it just wasn't felt that there was particular need for that. However, what we are doing with the building as it's progressing in terms of looking at the use would be to look to see whether there can be some use of some of the areas that are designed for guidance or support for learning that may also be utilised in that way, if that's possible and if the need would suggest that that's what's required. And for all future builds, the model that we've used for Riverside in a number of different ways will actually become the model that we look in, and that's not just in relation to the Path of House credentials, if you like, that's also about the configuration of teaching spaces and also about those additional spaces that are social, general, or for additional support needs. So that model that has been used most recently will become the model that we'll apply, whether that's for a refurb or a new build. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. And I do think for what it's worth, it's a really important question, actually. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Convener. My question is quite a high level one. It's the question of how we define disability. So is that from the Equalities Act 2010? Is it from some other source? And do we take into consideration things like temporary disabilities, someone who breaks a leg or get blinded by something like that, and things more modern, things like transgender? Is that built into what we're doing here? Is that it's not disability, but it's something that we should be looking at? So I'm just wondering what the definition is.
Fiona, thank you.
So the definition that we work to is the legal definition. However, what we recognise is that there are additional support needs in addition to disability. So we aim through this strategy to address both.
Thanks, Fiona. Councillor Duff.
Thanks. First of all, just following up from previous comments, I was pleased to see the comment regarding Riverside Primary School. When we talked about building it to Passive House standards, I don't think we were more talking about climate change and sustainability, and not thinking about the additional environmental benefits that the reduced noise and natural light might give to some of our pupils who have additional support needs. So that's nice to see, and that'll be my first comment. But my question is regarding additional support needs and whether that term comes from a medical diagnosis or is it assigned by the school after some kind of assessment of the child's needs. Thank you.
I think it's set down in legislation, but Fiona maybe confirm that.
So it comes from the additional support for learning legislation. So it doesn't need to be a medical diagnosis. Additional support needs can arise from a number of different factors, including things that are short term as well as long term, as Councillor Cuthbert referred to earlier on. It is quite a specific definition, and I think we've included it in the strategy, although obviously this is the progress report, but I'm happy to provide the definition if that would be helpful.
Sheena, to add, please.
Councillor Cuthbert, I'm conscious that Fiona touched on it there, and that was just what prompted me, that your question about that temporary nature, and you gave an example of a broken leg or whatever, whether there's accommodation made for that in terms of looking at what might need to be different for a short period of time for young people, and that is the case. So in the examples that you gave, things like the playground would be looked at in terms of accessibility to that, how safe that was, and actually both parent carers and young people's views in terms of how safe that might be for them if they had crutches or broken leg, that kind of thing. Accommodation can be made on different levels if the classroom is up the stairs and there's not a lift in the building. So there are provisions that can be made to support young people over a temporary nature. So apologies that part of your question wasn't picked up. Thank you.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Yeah, if I might come back. I mean, the point I was trying to make is, these things do happen, and was this looking at all schools to make sure that they could accommodate that happening, rather than when it happens, looking at the school to see how it can be accommodated, so that effectively we're making all schools up to a standard where it can accommodate any type of disability?
Indeed. Sheila.
There are a couple of assessments made of schools on a rolling programme. One is about suitability and the other is about condition of buildings, Councillor Cuthbert. And during that process, it's a combination of the head teacher and colleagues from property services who undertake that and then complete the required pro forma, so that we centrally then have an overview of suitability and condition of all of the buildings, and accessibility is something that's considered on an ongoing basis as part of that suitability. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett, please.
Thank you, convener. I'd just like to highlight that the link on page 29 to the strategy and plan, that action plan that this is based on, didn't actually work. It only took us to the introductory report, but I did manage to dig out the plan from the papers back in March 2023. And I found the report a bit difficult to follow and quite disappointing that we don't have any progress reports really on the success indicators that are set out in the plan, which I think would have helped us to measure progress much better. I just wondered why that hadn't been done.
Fiona, please.
So in terms of the success indicators, they will be picked up in this final year because they will allow us to identify and measure the progress that's been made over the course of the plan or the period of the plan. The plan is due to be renewed next year as we move into the final year of it now, but that would be a focus of both the progress, the final progress report, and the define what we are going to look at in the following strategy that will be set out for 25 to 28.
Sheila, you're going to add, please?
Councillor Barrett, I could just apologise for the link not having worked, so we will look to that and have that rectified and speak to committee services to have a version circulated around committee with a link that is working. Apologies for that.
Thank you both. Councillor Shires?
Thank you, convener. My question is around the section on page 42 about the school transport element, and I know that this is something that all elected members will understand the complexities around, particularly the more complex a child or a young person's needs are, and I just wondered how that was sitting and whether it was something that was going to become more of a challenge, because we know that actually getting school transport is a challenge, particularly the more rural you become. And then if you add into that a child with complex needs, it becomes even more of a challenge. But I understand there's parents that are involved in transporting their own young people to school. So it was just get a bit of an understanding about where we are with that and where we expect to go with it in future reports.
Yes, great question. Fiona?
So the home to school transport policy is not something in itself that has been looked at, been reviewed, but it's a guidance that sits alongside it. And you're absolutely right that there are a number of challenges, both in terms of availability of specialist vehicles, such as those with wheelchairs, and in terms of just the number of taxi companies that are available. So we do work with the public transport unit to be able to support and tender for the most appropriate vehicles possible. In some situations, parents actually would choose to transport their child because they feel that they know their needs best, and that would be most appropriate. In other situations, we're also looking to work with our communities, if you like, to look at how to make the most use out of both facilities and resources, but also to provide children and young people with the most beneficial experience. So that bit about development of a project at Perth Grammar, where we moved from having 3 taxis to 1 minibus, which was still a taxi, but it was a minibus that was used to transport a group of 9 children rather than them all being in 3 separate taxis. That was really appreciated by the young people because it was more of a school experience that they felt was beneficial. So we are working with the public transport unit to look at how we can extend learning like that to make it as effective as possible for children and young people, but recognising that we will still have a demand on some or depending on some needs, to keep that into quite individualised or smaller scale taxi situations. But in terms of that, it is an ongoing challenge. You know, it is something that we need to continue to work with, but we will work with our communities to be able to support our or to work with the taxi companies to be able to make that work.
Thanks, Fiona. Sheena, please.
Thank you. And I think just to add to what Fiona said, Councillor Shires, there are probably three things that we need to consider here. And one is around the increasing level of need and the complexity of that, and youngsters that do have, you know, enduring and complex needs. One is about, and Fiona alluded to this, changes in terms of transport suppliers, if you like. I can't think of a better word, but you know what I mean. Providers is the word that I mean, and the location of those. And then that which I mentioned earlier, which is about, as part of that wider review, looking across, as we've done from an ELC perspective. As you know, we've looked at localities of a blend of ELC provision in different localities, and taking that model into the world of additional support needs, and looking at where it's possible perhaps to provide a blend of different additional support needs within a locality that would then reduce the need for transportation being required. So when we take those three things together, the time is actually right then to have a look at a wholesale review actually of two things. One would be the additional support needs, home to school transport, and the other is that wider statutory home to school transport, just dependent on how far away from your catchment school you live, and looking at trying to get some greater economies of scale from that. So there was money provided in the budget that was set in March, and that would be a piece of work that our public transport unit would lead on, and that we would be involved and feed into. And I think the time is absolutely right for that because of those interconnected factors. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Councillor Braun.
Thanks, convener. Apologies first of all, because obviously I'm not a regular member of the committee. I may be asking a question from the wrong angle, if I may, but and it comes in three parts, so it's all interlinked. So you can even give a one word answer to all of them. I think it really circles around the Anne Frank workshop, which we'll agree is a very important project, particularly in the current climate, but it obviously deals with discrimination and racism across the board, and on where that sort of thing can lead to ultimately. It's important. So the three parts are really, is the workshops going to continue? That's the first thing. Secondly, will pupils who have disability or additional support needs be able to become part of it? And indeed, will they be able to be peer guides, which is an important part of it? And the third part is, some years ago, pre-COVID, officers had told me that we do send children from schools to Poland, to Auschwitz for visits. I mean, if they are still ongoing, will the pupils we're talking about with disabilities and additional support needs be able to be included in those visits? So it's a three-part question there. I'm sorry again if I'm coming from the wrong angle.
No, Councillor Braun, it's a perfectly valid question. Thank you for the three of them. I think the short answers are yes, yes, and yes. So I'll maybe come to Fiona to expand on that, please.
Yes, I suppose there's two different things. So in terms of the workshops and them being accessible, that would always be the case, and we would prioritise ensuring that the venue, etc., was suitable. And that would be the same for any school trips that we were looking to take forward, that we would have an expectation that all children within the school cohort that was being targeted would have equal access to anything like that. In terms of continuation, we will continue to engage with the Anne Frank organisation to be able to take forward those workshops as and when they felt that was appropriate for taking on.
Marvellous. Thank you. Thanks, convener.
Not at all. Thanks, Councillor Braun. Councillor Freshwater.
Yes, thank you, convener. This is in relation to just 5.3, duty number 2 in relation to improving the physical environment. And I think Sheena touched on the end of this, touched on this at the end of the response to Councillor Cuthbert. But in relation to the audit, of the learning environments, and I appreciate this may be one for the estates team rather than education. What's the sort of benchmark that's typically used for that? Is it a kind of localized benchmark once you've done the audit and the assessment? Is that assessed against a PKC benchmark, or is there a national standard that's set across, or even a third party? Thank you.
Fiona?
The audit of ISPs was drawn from unsupported and developed by a range of different groups. So we consulted with our hearing impairment, visual impairment teaching team around the elements that would be important for them. We discussed it with our speech and language colleagues, with NHS Tayside, and with our property colleagues in terms of what they are aware of from expectations in other audits. There is no national benchmark around an audit like this, because we were looking at so many different parts of the ISP that it covered a range of different areas.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to understand a bit more about the circle. Are all staff trained in circle?
Fiona?
Well, I think we're just completing year 3 of our implementation of Circle, and that extends to all schools. There are resources that are available, and there's training that is available online as well as in person that has been supported by our educational psychology team. All teaching staff are expected to have completed that training or the online training, and have completed an audit of that. So yes, the materials are made available by Education Scotland, so are online should anybody want to see those.
Sheila, please.
And I think just to add that we undertake an audit in terms of those staff who have participated, and that's underway just now, Councillor Stewart. So by the end of this term, we'd be able to give you a definitive answer in relation to that, but we've certainly seen an increase year on year. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Convener. I was just really to get further clarification. On page 22, where it states to improve the delivery to disabled pupils of information which is readily accessible to pupils who are not disabled, the following item 1 says within a reasonable time. I just really like to sort of know what's defined as a reasonable time. Thank you.
Fiona, please.
22.
So that is set out in the legislation. It doesn't come in, it just gives us that definition of a reasonable, well, it doesn't give us a definition of a reasonable time, it just makes that statement around that. I think that that would be for us to determine as to where and when we felt that was suitable. Sorry, that's not a particularly clear answer, but it was, because it was taken from the guidance.
All right, thank you. But I was just wondering, in terms of the expectation, I mean, is that sort of terms of like days or weeks, or within the term time, or because it's a kind of the need's been identified, it's kind of really important that gets responded to quickly. Thank you.
Quite right, Councillor McPherson. I'm going to ask Sheila to add to what Fiona's already answered, please.
The really unhelpful answer is, Councillor McPherson, it would vary depending on what the particular issue was. So if it was about translation of materials from one language to another, that could be done very, very quickly. If it was about reconfiguration of a physical space, then obviously that the length of time that that would take would be determined by how quickly the plans could be drawn up, the work done, and all the rest of it. So that there would be a range of things that we would expect could be done in relatively short order, and other things would just take a bit longer. I suppose it's really saying that once you know something, you can't unknow it, nor be thinking about how you're going to act upon it. And so you have a duty to do that within as reasonably short a period of time as possible. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Councillor McPherson. Thanks. Sheena, I think as we move into second questions and third questions, well, in the nicest possible when we call time on this paper, if that's okay. Councillor Cuthbert, second question, please.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, my question relates to paragraph 5.1. It says that progress in relation to the delivery of the outcomes and actions identified in the action plan 2022-25 has been collated from a wide range of staff across education and other PKC services and partners. My question is, were pupils consulted? Were parent councils consulted? Were the parent forum consulted? Or did we just take it from the teaching staff? Sorry.
That's okay. Fiona.
So the actions that they are included in the action plan are quite wide and varied, and some of it will be around training. So we will get feedback from those that participated in the training, not just teaching staff, but other school staff or partner staff. There will be information in it that is in relation to the buildings, in which case, again, we'll get it from a number of different teams within the council. It's not necessarily just our teaching staff within schools. In terms of feedback from children and young people, that would be in relation to situations such as the Anne Frank workshops or other workshops that were there that they had participated in. So certainly there would be an expectation that children and young people are included and involved at all points in terms of providing their feedback. In relation to parents, I'm trying to think in a particular example which would be relevant, but certainly in terms of the information that's provided for parents, we do engage with our parents with children and young people with additional support needs to get an understanding about what's important for them in terms of what's shared. So, you know, although it may not be detailed specifically in the summarised information there, that certainly parents increasingly are encouraged to be part and parcel of the feedback. And at a school level, the feedback that schools gain from their children and young people and from their parent community is quite significant in terms of what they plan. So when they are taking forward, and it will be schools themselves that will be taking forward some of the workshops or activity around, particularly around equalities, that will be based on the feedback that they've had from their wider school community about what's important for them. But there is always more that we can do in terms of getting feedback. When the strategy was developed, there was a public consultation that was undertaken to help to define what was included and what wasn't included. When we finalise this 3 years, we would go back out to consultation in terms of that, and that would help us to develop our next iteration of the action plan and strategy as well.
Thanks, Fiona. Sheena, to add, please.
I was going to mention the consultation that had taken place with a range of stakeholders, if Fiona hadn't mentioned that. Thank you.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Yeah, I was listening quite carefully there. I didn't hear parent councils mentioned. I would have thought it would be sensible to take this exercise to parent councils, ask them to consult with the parent forum, and then collate their own identified needs, if you like. The reason I say that is that the parent forum are more likely to approach a parent council than they might be the teaching staff. So it just seems more logical. We should include them in this.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, Councillor Cuthbert. I think
yep.
We'll just note that. I think, Fiona, you're
happy to note that, but also to make the point that we did involve parent council chairs at the time of the development of this strategy, so they also made sure that that parents were aware of the consultation.
Thanks, Fiona. Noted, Councillor Cuthbert. I'm going to come to Councillor Barrett next. I know you have a third question. If I don't quite get the order here, apologies in advance, but I will make sure everybody gets their second question in. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, convener. Mine follows on from Councillor Cuthbert's question. I saw on page 37 that in reference to the transition into P1, 90% of parents felt satisfied, but there's nothing in the report about getting the views back. Or it looks from page 50 as if parent sessions were held at the points of transition to secondary, but it would be useful when we get the report next year. Can we please know about satisfaction of parents about the transition to secondary? Because I know some concerns have been expressed about that recently. Thank you.
Not at all, thank you. Again, we'll just note that if that's okay, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, convener. If you'll indulge me, I think my question is a bit of a three-parter, but it is linked, and hopefully you'll see where I'm going. I'm interested in the approximate percentage of pupils in our schools that are or require additional support needs, and how that compares pre-COVID, say 5 or 10 years ago. And is our ASN training for staff keeping pace with the current situation? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Again, I think the short answer is yes, but I'm not sure we'll get away with that. Fiona?
Our current data, which is taken from the 2023 census of our children and young people, so that's undertaken in September, showed that we had a rate of 34% of children and young people with additional support needs across our schools. That's higher in secondary than it is in primary, because a number of additional support needs then become evident as children work their way through the schools. The numbers have risen since pre-COVID and have been rising, I think, over the last 10 years would be the best. And that what we're seeing is that that's pretty consistent across the country as well. Our level of 34% is pretty consistent with that of Scotland as a whole, and we will be reviewing that as and when we get to the census period in September again this year. In terms of the training and what we've provided, we do definitely provide more training for our teaching and support staff now since COVID, and since we've been able to particularly bring people back together to participate in things like joint in-service days. The training that is made available is for both teaching staff and our pupil support assistants and others who are supporting children and young people in schools. There's always a question around, is that enough training? And I think that people would always say that there's always room for more, which is why we will continue to have a robust training programme planned for next academic year, starting right from the very beginning of the in-service days in August.
Thank you. Councillor Cuthbert, if you have an extra question, as it were, an additional support need, it might be appropriate to ask it at this time, if you would.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just, I think one of the things about ASN is that it's a very broad church. It ranges from sort of a family incident right the way through to severe sort of cases. I would be interested in seeing some sort of breakdown. I don't know whether that can be provided. I'm not asking for it here because obviously that's quite a big question. But my suspicion is that there's a lot more of the sort of mental health type instability that's been caused by COVID that's causing the ASN numbers to go up. But I'd be interested to know what the core is doing, i.e. the ones that really need long-term ASN support.
Yeah, again, you and I have had conversations about this. I think that's a very pertinent question. I'm not sure we want to try and answer that in too much detail today, but yeah, absolutely. I think that's quite right, and I think it's also important to note, and I'm not suggesting anybody's suggesting otherwise, that recognising an additional support need and making provision for it is a positive thing, and I think it's important to note that. But yeah, it's a good point. Sheila?
Councillor Cuthbert, we have a breakdown of that and we'd be happy to circulate that, which gives an indication, as you say, from a transient temporary passing need right through to those more enduring and complex needs. So we have all of those classified, and that's something that we could put a short summary together and easily share with all members of the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, convener. My question's kind of around the resource implications section in the paper, where it talks about the relatively small amount of money that was put into the budget this year. And those of us that know anyone in the education sector know that they can make a very small amount of money go a very long way, particularly in schools when you can see them creating, you know, huge amounts of space out of what looks like a cupboard to the rest of us. So yeah, all credit to them on that front. However, I'm aware that, you know, we're one of 32 local authorities. Everybody will be doing this or similar pieces of work to this. We've heard from Fiona that the rates of children with identified needs is increasing. And it says in the resource implications that this will be funded out of our budgets, which are tighter every year. So my question, and I don't know if it's for you, convener, for Ms Devlin, is how are we making these representations to Scottish Government? Because the implications for us longer term, in order to meet the needs, quite rightly, as expected under law, of these children and young people, that we're going to meet their needs appropriately as these strategies and action plans lay out. But we can only do it with what we've got, and it's going to become tighter and tighter. So will that form part of this will obviously feed into the budget setting process, but again, we can only squeeze out what we can out of that, and I think it is something national government are going to have to recognise that we just can't keep doing that.
Thanks, Councillor Shires. I think there is a bit of politics with a small p in that, so I will answer at least part of the question, and I think you're absolutely right. I think this will be challenging. We have not shied away at all from making an additional support need and the provision for it a priority, but it's a difficult road, frankly. We are making representations on a political level as a party to parliamentary colleagues all the time on it. How fruitful that will be, time will tell, but this is a priority of this administration, and you're absolutely right to raise the challenges of resource, because it's difficult, and the reasons for that are manifold and not necessarily for debate today.
If I could come back in just on a very practical level, so with this particular action plan and strategy, how is that then alerted to Scottish Government? Because I'm guessing all 32 local authorities are doing. So is that through ADES, Sheena, or what is the forum, or through COSLA? What is the forum for us to say, this is where we are, this is where we're going to be in the lifetime of this plan? What then? Because we can't do it on, I think the budget monies were 50,000 perhaps. Yeah. I'm thinking, you know, that's just scratching the surface.
There's certainly been conversations that caused that, but I shall let Sheena answer the direct question about ADES.
COSLA would be the political route for any matters like this to be raised, Councillor Shires. In terms of what work has been done nationally, Education and Skills Committee set out requests for evidence in relation to the provision of all aspects of additional support needs. We provided, as a group of local authority officers, we provided information to them. ADES, as the Association of Directors of Education Scotland, also provided a response to that, and in fact colleagues from ADES attended committee, the Education and Skills Committee, to answer questions and be involved in the debate. That report is now published. I'm happy to ask Wallace to circulate a link to that report from the Education and Skills Committee. So they've now published their findings, and there are some recommendations in there that are for consideration for Scottish Government. In addition to that, Audit Scotland have been commissioned to undertake a piece of work looking more specifically at the resource and finance side, and are keen not to duplicate anything that the Education and Skills Committee may have taken some time to look at in terms of the evidence that they requested. And once again, I can confirm that through my role in ADES, that we actually have a meeting set up with Audit Scotland next week to discuss the scoping of that piece of work. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Shares. I mean, I do think as well, and it's not a direct answer to this particular question, but for me, this discussion just underlines the importance of Pupil Equity Fund as well, which I know that I bore everybody with on a regular basis, but it does underline the importance of it. But thank you for the question. Councillor Ahern, and then final word from Councillor Cuthbert, please.
Thank you very much. My question is on the anti-bullying strategy, which is detailed in page 45. We know there are a number of schools that do have a particular issue with bullying, and there has been consultation and engagement. Firstly, has there been significant changes in that policy? Because it obviously wasn't working in these schools before. And it says there the next steps that it will be launched. Is it going to be launched in time for the new school year?
Sheila, please.
In terms of the your comment, Bailey Ahern, around some schools, that I would be surprised if there were any schools where from time to time there weren't issues with bullying. I think it's unfortunately a sad fact of life that exists in all and every school across the country. I don't think there would be any school at particular times that could safely say that they are forever, and always immune. Populations in school are not static, so cohorts move through. And that changes, and therefore guidance that may work, to use your phrase, with some cohorts may not be as effective with others. And similarly, in terms of turnover of staff and their familiarity with different processes as well, there can be a number of reasons why particular things may come to a head at particular times. So I think what we're doing is updating the policy because society changes. And the world in which young people live and exist changes, and we're updating that to reflect that. So there's a suite of guidance that's being provided for schools linked to different aspects of supporting young people, whether that's with behaviour, with attitudes and approaches around managing bullying incidences and all the rest of it. And yes, that will be out in all schools before the end of this term, with a view that that's then available for every school from the start of next term.
Just a quick follow-up on that. I'm aware bullying really occurs in every school, but there are certain schools that have a significant issue. And in terms of the new policy, where I have come across where there's been a big difference is the consequences of that bullying, where some schools take a completely different attitude towards what happens to people that, or the young people that commit the bullying, which I personally don't agree with, but we'll have to see what. So is it the new policy standardising the response to those individuals that commit the bullying in the school?
I mean, but just before Sheena comes in, I think the response always has to be a bespoke one personally, but Sheena will add.
And we've discussed this before, haven't we, in this committee about the notion of consequences. And I think one of my observations, Bailey Ahern, would be that there has been a sense developing that consequences have not been part of the existing approach, and they actually have been. So that there have always been the facility for consequences to be invoked. And as the convener said, that those consequences would be dependent on individual circumstances. Where in some places we have seen a bit of an over tendency to focus on only restorative approaches, which is an appropriate tool, absolutely, and it's certainly not a soft option. And I guess what we're doing within the revised guidance is actually reminding people that there are a range of different strategies that are appropriate and effective depending on circumstances, and that sometimes something short, more focused rather than an elongated restorative approach might actually be the most appropriate sanctions in those circumstances. So absolutely, that's part of the revised procedures, but that's not to say that they're not there in the existing ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ahern. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. My final question is on point 5.2.1 on page 22, and it's the second bullet point. That basically says that all secondary schools completed a validated self-evaluation. My question there is, I understand that parent councils weren't included in that self-evaluation. I understand that parent councils have a role in school improvement. So I'm wondering why they weren't included, because they are the representatives of the parent forum and thereby to some extent the pupils. So why were parent councils not incorporated in that?
Sheila.
You're absolutely right about parental involvement in aspects of school improvement, Councillor Cuthbert, and we have, through our quality improvement framework, undertaken different kinds of visits to school, learning and achievement visits, extended learning and achievement visits, and so on. And parents, not necessarily always the parent council, but parents who are available to be able to be part of some of those processes that happen and discussions that happen during the school day are invited. The validated self-evaluation was quite a specific activity, where what we were actually doing was trialling a particular activity following on from a piece of work that had been undertaken in the local authority. And so again, through ADES and working in partnership with Education Scotland, a process called collaborative improvement had been developed, which was about local authorities volunteering to have different aspects of their provision looked at and challenged and supported by peers from other local authorities and also from Education Scotland. And by October of this year, over an 18-month period, all 32 local authorities will have participated in that. We were the third local authority to participate in that, and we happened to pick looking at aspects of additional support needs provision in our secondary schools. And for the purposes of that particular validated self-evaluation, no parent councils or parents were involved, because what we were keen to understand was about the current setup in schools as it was delivered by staff. That was the focus, and the impact that that was having from a staff perspective. And so it wasn't an area that parents were included in. We don't need to have parents involved in validated self-evaluations. For that particular one, no parent councils were involved. And that was actually as much about trialling a process to develop school staff as being able to undertake a validated self-evaluation in other schools as anything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Thanks, everyone. I think that was a really good discussion, actually, if that doesn't sound patronising. So thank you for all those questions. We covered a lot of stuff there. So in moving the report, I'm going to keep it really short, because actually we've spoken about most of what I've written down. But and I want to thank Fiona as well for answering a lot of those questions. Thank you. Accessibility is clearly important in our schools, whether it's literal accessibility or in the broader sense that we've been discussing today. So I welcome this report. It's a 3-year report. I think there's lots of good work already been done, but as always, there's no room for complacency. And I do think this report sets out where we need to go quite clearly and how we're going to get there. So I am happy to move the report, and I'm going to ask Councillor Frampton to formally second it, please.
Happy to second it.
Thank you, Councillor Frampton. Any comments? Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Convener. Yep, I'm very happy to support the report. It's very comprehensive. There's a lot of work clearly gone into it, and that's appreciated. And just the comments that we discussed earlier about, you know, a significant amount of cross-party lobbying of the Scottish Government, that this is not going to get any easier for local authorities, and so that any support and funding will be very well made good use of by those that manage to squeeze quite a lot out of pretty small sums of money. So thank you very much.
Agreed. Thank you very much. We'll move on to paper 6, which is the future Tayside Regional Improvement Collaborative Plans / Tayside Plan for Children, Young People and Families Grant Fund update. Might have been snappier, but that does what it says in the tin, and Sheena, I think, is going to introduce it.
brevity is not in that title, convener. You're absolutely right. Apologies for that. This paper, however, is a brief paper in itself, and provides committee with an update on the national funding model for regional improvement collaboratives across Scotland. This same paper is being taken to respective committees in Angus and in Dundee. In the context of a revised funding model, the Tayside Regional Improvement Collaborative Leadership Group have now reviewed how the revised funding allocation will be utilised for the current financial year, and that's detailed in the paper. Convener, I'm happy to take any questions in relation to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Questions, please? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, convener. It's obviously very disappointing that we've had this cut to funding at quite short notice, and thanks to everybody who's been involved in making the adjustments necessary. Can I ask what's been cut? You know, we've got half what we thought we would have for this year, and thank you for the list of what we are still going to be able to do. Could you please tell us what's gone? Thank you.
I mean, again, I'll answer the slightly political question in the nicest possible way. I don't mean that in any way detrimental. I mean, my understanding is that the money has just been reappropriated in education and children's service, namely the Teacher for Excellence. I guess, given the conversation we've just had, I suspect that there will be a lot more money moving to different priorities, quite rightly, over the years, given the austere times we live in. But maybe Sheila can go further than that.
In terms of the reduction in funding to each of the regional improvement collaboratives, Councillor Barrett, at a national level, the monies that are no longer coming to the collaboratives are now being held to go against what's called the Centre for Teaching Excellence. So that's a part of the wider structural reform agenda across Scotland, where we'll see a revised qualification awarding body, a revised version of Education Scotland, an independent inspectorate separate to Education Scotland, and the establishment of Centre for Teaching Excellence. In terms of that reform, structural reform programme, there is a series of boards and groups have been established with different representation from different stakeholders across the education landscape. And my understanding is that the Centre for Teaching Excellence Board has met at least once, perhaps twice. I'm not sure the detail of that. In terms of what's not being funded at a local level in the context of the RIC, which I think is where you were going, what we did was an analysis of each of the 5 work streams and the work that was being taken forward, and looked to see where some of the work that had previously had an injection of money through the national funding was probably at a mainstreaming stage. And so an obvious example of that was in Priority Group 1 around the combined work relating to the rollout of 1140 hours that had been taking place. In the context of Priority Group 4, Care and Equity, there had been some funded joint work around aspects of the promise, which now in each local authority area, we are using I'm going to get this right. The abbreviations are LAC, Looked After Children, Scottish Attainment Challenge funding. Yes, the LAC, SAC monies is being used to support that development. In relation to Priority Group 5, which is about Safe and Protected, then that group, the work that had been undertaken there had probably come to a natural conclusion. And so the focus within that group will be around the Bairnshuis and the SCIM, which is the Scottish Child Interview Model. And there's no funding coming for SCIM, so the local authorities are finding that themselves, but there is Pathfinder money for the Bairnshuis work, and so that will be getting taken forward through that way. And sorry not to have done this in numerical order, but it's just come in as I've remembered it. The third priority group, which was the health and wellbeing work, again, the monies that had been provided there to establish 2 key strategies One was around mental health and wellbeing, and the other was around healthy childhood weight. Those strategies are completed in terms of their development and their launch, and now it is about their adoption within each area. So we felt that the monies that were remaining would rightly focus on the areas that were still those that we wanted not just to keep going with, but perhaps to expand. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
That was a much better answer than mine, to be fair. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, convener. I think I was quite surprised when I heard that the funding was being reduced, and it comes back again. And I think I'm mentioning COSLA more today than I've ever done ever. Were there discussions that took place? Sheena might know the answer to this. Were there discussions that took place with COSLA prior to the decision being taken to reduce the funding? And I also understood the external OECD analysis of the regional improvement collaboratives had indicated that they were actually delivering quite good results. And locally, I mean, you know, we're organised, we've got so much in common with Angus and Dundee and Perth and Kinross, having sat on the, as Councillor Barrett has, and Councillor Frampton, the Children, Young People and Families Partnership. You can see the interweaving between the work that is done through the NHS and other partners across those three local authorities, and it all seemed to sit really well. And you would hear from teachers about, you know, the work that was being done. So trying to find what my question was there. So was there discussions that took place, and a political question for you, convener, is that the funding was reduced prior to the analysis being done in that report that said it was delivering results, and what representation can we make to say, could that be looked at? Because that seems a nonsensical way of making a decision.
I think the answer, I don't remember a discussion at COSLA, frankly. I think it is a decision that Scottish Government have taken given the austere times. I think there was some understanding that the work could continue with less money, frankly. I do agree 100% that collaboration with Angus and Dundee is really important. I think that will continue, albeit by necessity in a slightly different way. But collaboration is important, and without patronising, I think we saw the benefits of that with the solution we came up with, for example, with the Harris Academy extension, one which I've supported, but I'm lucky enough to inherit, if you like. So collaboration is really important, and the Young People's Partnership is another great example of that. So it's important that we keep doing that, and we find a way to keep doing that. But we are in austere times, and these things are going to happen. Thank you. If there are no more questions, I will move this report. I think I've just, the speech I had written, I think I've just said, but just to underline that collaboration will continue to be really important. We need to find ways of doing that. We will endeavour to do that as much as we possibly can in administration, and I am happy to move the report, and I'm going to ask Councillor Carr to formally second it.
Happy to second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Barrett, please, and then Councillor Shires for comment.
Thank you, convener. I'd just like to thank Audrey and the team for all the work that's gone into adapting what we were doing and what we're now doing and working it out for 24-25. I do welcome the emphasis on the virtual campus. I think that's vital in providing a range of subjects to pupils, especially in STEM subjects and languages. And I do support the emphasis that's being given to that, just to say thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Virtual campus is indeed important. Councillor Shires.
Absolutely second what Councillor Barrett has just said about the virtual campus, and to thank Audrey May and Sheena Devlin for their work. They really evidence what can be done when they all work together, and you know, whether you be a teacher in Edsall or a teacher in Glenlyon, you can share that, you know, good practice with each other, and I think that will be a legacy of the trick that will probably continue. I really would dispute your comments though, convener, about, you know, when times are difficult, you look at the evidence of what's making a difference. You don't then dump it, you build on it. and they were, you know, very small sums of money in the great scheme of things that were delivering results. And I think it's really sad that that decision's been taken. But I'm very confident that our officers will continue to work with their colleagues in Angus and Dundee through the other forums that we have. Thank you.
Not at all. We'll agree to disagree on whether it's been dumped or not, respectfully, but appreciate your comments and your questions as well. We are done. Thanks very much, everyone. I think that genuinely, I think that was a good conversation today, and it's appreciated. Thank you.